Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Today, we are covering evil comes in every shape and form, right? And this little guy, he is no different. Today we are covering the horrific monster that is Pee Wee Gaskins, also known as Donald Henry Gaskins, but Pee Wee is such a funny name and kind of mocks him, so I'm going to be referring to him as Pee Wee. I honestly believe, and I mean he kind of admits it himself anyway, but Pee Wee Gaskins was just someone who loved to inflict torture, pain and fear into everyone that he encountered. It's almost like he had something to prove to people, and he always wanted to be the toughest guy in the room. Not only would he target men and women, this sick, horrific monster would also target children. He is vile beyond words, and it is thought that he could have anywhere between 80 to 90 victims. Before we get into today's case, please make sure you are subscribed, hit the notification bell so you don't miss when I upload, which is every Wednesday and Sunday, 7:30 British Standard Time, as you know, because I tell you all the time. Please make sure you engage in this video in some way, whether it's a like, a comment or a share, which would be really good. Any case suggestions that you have can be left in the comments below, or you can send them to my email, which you will find down in the description. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the case of Pee Wee Gaskins. So Donald Henry Gaskins, also known as Pee Wee Gaskins, Pee Wee, right? Hilarious, absolutely love it. You will hear me refer to him as Pee Wee throughout this video, and at one point I will get to why he was called Pee Wee, right? But isn't it just funny when you can really, slag off these horrible, horrific monsters? I love it. Pee Wee Gaskins, he was born on the 13th of March 1933 in Florence County of South Carolina, and he was born to Ulia Parrott? Don't know her name, but he was the last of her illegitimate children. Now apparently she had, multiple lovers, which were allowed, I'm not judging, but this would mean that through Pee Wee's life he would have a lot of different father figures, and if I'm completely honest, none of these father figures were good father figures. Now it is stated that Pee Wee's mother didn't really have much interest in Pee Wee whatsoever. I'm sorry, Pee Wee, so funny. But his mother didn't really have much interest in him. She was quite neglectful of him, and apparently he did suffer some physical abuse at the hands of a male relative. Now, according to Pee Wee, his mother was so neglectful of him that he never learned his first name, Donald, until his first court appearance for a string of rapes that he committed with his friends. Like, Pee Wee only realises that he's actually called Donald when he appears in court. Don't know how much I believe that. Like, surely someone shouted on you and called you Donald. Or maybe everyone just called him Pee Wee and he just never knew, but apparently. Now, Pee Wee, when he was 1 year old, according to him, he had drank a bottle of kerosene, which he said caused very violent convulsions until the age of 3. Now, of course, this is what he's saying, so like, how much truth is in that? But he also said that this incident of, his mother being so neglectful that he can drink an entire bottle of kerosene at the age of 1, apparently this would be the cause of his atrocities that he committed later in life. As we know, these sick individuals, they really like to have an excuse. It always stems back to the childhood. And I'm not going to deny, some of these people, they have horrific childhoods, but I do not excuse their behaviour for 1 second. I believe that you can have a horrific childhood and grow up to be a fantastic person because you don't want the cycle of abuse to repeat. So traumatic childhoods, I'm sorry, I'm not taking that as an excuse, ever, period. Now, as we sort of touched on earlier, Pee Wee, he didn't actually know who his father was. He had no idea who it might be, and I'm not entirely sure that his mother knew who it was either. So, as I had said, she would go through, various lovers, partners, etc. And it is said that Pee Wee would be abused by the majority of these partners. Now, as Pee Wee grew up, he was known to be a great manipulator and quite the con artist. He was also apparently very street smart, had a good sense of humour, don't know how much I believe that, but that's what they said, and also had like an entertaining personality. Throughout Pee Wee's adolescence, he would get involved with a group of like-minded delinquents and criminals, and they would call themselves the Trouble Trio, which, like, if you're going to cause trouble and think you're cool, please don't call yourself the Trouble Trio. It's not given what you think it's given. It's actually embarrassing, okay? Now listen, you hear something like the Trouble Trio, right? And it is so immature beyond belief. It sounds like a little group of boys, and they were a group of really young boys, but the things that they did was so horrific. They were involved in burglaries, they were involved in assaults, and they were also involved in a horrific gang rape. Yes, and Pee Wee himself, years later, even stated that they would go around raping little boys. Children. What? At the age of 13, Pee Wee was convicted of an assault after he attacked a young girl with an axe when he was caught breaking into her family home. He hit her over the head with the axe, he drew blood, like he split into her skull, and he left her to bleed out and die. Now, luckily, this young girl, she survived this horrific attack and she was able to confidently identify her attacker, which got him convicted. Now, Pee Wee, he would be found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon and intent to kill. Now, for this, attempted murder, I guess you could say, Pee Wee was sentenced to 5 years in a reform school in Florence, and he did say that during his time in this reform school, he would be constantly raped by his fellow inmates, and he also said that very shortly after he started attending this reform school, he was gang raped by a group of 20 boys. Now listen, I don't know what's true, okay, because this guy, this Pee Wee, he does lie a lot, but I do not like to doubt someone's experiences. This is what he said. Now, it is also said in order to have some protection within this reform school, he would almost become like a sexual slave to the dorm's boss boy, who in turn would protect him from the sexual assaults. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, Anna, why are you referring to Donald as Pee Wee? Well, when Pee Wee became an adult, he only grew to the size of 5'4" to 5'5", which, for reference, I'm 5'4" on a good day, okay? So, like, I'm heights with Pee Wee, and I'm relatively small, okay? Now, I would never make fun of anyone for their height. Never, ever. I mean, I know I make fun of my own height, but that's me. I would never make fun of anyone for their height, but this little man, he was called Pee Wee because he was around 5'4" and only weighed around 130 pounds. Now, it's funny, right? So in Scotland, we have this thing where, if someone's small, but they think they're all like tough and all big, we say that they've got wee man syndrome. So wee man syndrome is basically, like I said, when you are some tiny, toty little guy and you think you're like Charlie Big Balls and you're not. So I think Pee Wee, I think he had wee man syndrome, okay? I think he was acting tough to make up for his short stature. Now, during Pee Wee's time in reform school, at one point, after, a few failed attempts, a few tries, he was able to escape. Now, when he escaped this reform school, he ran away, got married. Bearing in mind he was in there at the age of 13, okay, but he gets married, and I was like, what kind of woman is likely to take this man as a husband? Like, what are we seeing in little Pee Wee Gaskins, Then I realised that this was not a woman he married, it was a 13-year-old girl. Yes. And then what Pee Wee Gaskins does is he's like, do you know what? I'm a married man and I need to take some accountability. So he voluntarily puts himself back to the reform school to complete his sentence. Pee Wee, it's too late. You're a dirtbag. Just give it up. So in 1951, at the age of 18, little Pee Wee Gaskins was released from the reform school. He completed his sentence, 18 years old, fresh start, let's hope. It's not going to be, but for a brief period of time, he did work on a tobacco farm, which eventually he made into his own little money-making scheme. What he was doing is he was stealing the crops and then like selling them on the side to make his own little profit. Not only that, he was basically taking a fee to burn down barns for multiple people so they could claim the insurance money. So like, you know, crooks working with crooks, making the world go round for themselves. But yeah, these people just have a way of finding each other. It's crazy. Now, as you can probably imagine, reformed little Pee Wee doesn't last too long because he was arrested again after attacking a young woman with a hammer, splitting her skull open, all because she insulted him. That's all it takes apparently, a small little insult and he pops off. So he was sent away to South Carolina State Penitentiary and apparently like once he got here, he was sexually enslaved to a gang leader. Yeah. Now apparently this guy who Pee Wee was sexually enslaved to, apparently he was like the toughest guy in the prison, right? Now, Pee Wee, he does not want to take any more of this sexual enslavement, so he murders this man, the most feared man in prison. And he winds up being so respected throughout the prison because he killed this like top guy. Now, Pee Wee had said that the murder of this man was in self-defense, and I guess because they were probably aware of, you know, the sexual abuse going on between the guy and Pee Wee, he was only given an additional 3 years to his prison sentence. Now, after this murder in the prison of this, you know, madman, Pee Wee would spend 6 months in solitary confinement. As soon as he came out of solitary confinement, he was known to be the aggressor rather than the victim in these situations. Now, Pee Wee, somehow in 1955, he was able to escape from prison in the back of a garbage truck and fled to Florida. How does this... Are we not watching our criminals? Like, sir, please tell me. So once he got to Florida, he did get himself a job with a travelling carnival, which, you know, would be the worst thing in the world for him because... aren't carnivals meant to be fun and happy, not evil and sadistic? However, luckily he would be rearrested, but then in August of 1961 he would be paroled, which is like the worst thing that could happen. Now, of course, following his release from prison, he did just go back to his old tricks. He was, you know, committing burglaries, he was fencing stolen goods, which fencing is basically when you act as a middleman between the goods being stolen and then the goods eventually being bought. Now, just 2 years after his parole, he would be arrested again for the brutal rape of a 12-year-old girl. This sick individual. Now, somehow, when he was awaiting his sentencing, he was able to disappear, so he escaped again. However, he would be caught in Georgia, rearrested, and would be sentenced to 8 years in prison. So Pee Wee, yet again, gets paroled in 1968 and he decides to move to the town of Sumter, and whilst he's here he would get a job working with a roofing company. And now we are going to get into the even more horrific crimes of Pee Wee Gaskins. No, I say that we're going to get into even more horrific crimes, but let's be absolutely honest, he has already done the worst thing imaginable. He has hurt children up until this point, so I guess we just keep going, but this time it would all lead to murder. So in September of 1969, Pee Wee Gaskins would murder a blonde hitchhiker. He had picked up this young female hitchhiker and he tried to proposition her for sex, right? Now this young blonde female, she looks at him and kind of laughs in his face. Now, I mean, can you blame her? I mean, look at him, right? Laughs in his face. Now, because of this, he decides to beat her until she is unconscious. Now, once she's unconscious, he then proceeds to sodomise her. And whilst he is brutally sodomizing her, he realises just how much he loves this, how much fun he is having doing and inflicting this pain and misery on someone, and he decides that he would like to prolong that torture. Now, whilst he is torturing this young female while she is unconscious, he realises that because she is unconscious, there is nothing that he can't do to her. And he loved this. Now, usually Pee Wee would keep victims for a number of days or a number of weeks, but this young girl's body was sunken into a swamp. Now, according to Pee Wee, this young female hitchhiker was the first of many victims that he would kill whilst he was going up and down the coastal highways. Now, he would refer to these kills as his coastal kills, and it would be men, women, children, whoever he could get his hands on to satisfy his sick urges. Now, Gaskins himself, he claimed that he would torture and mutilate his victims and that he tried his best to keep them alive as long as possible so he could further prolong this torture. He wanted them to feel each and every single thing he done to them. Now, he would stab them, suffocate them, mutilate them, and apparently he would even cannibalise some of them. Now, Pee Wee, he tried to later claim that he had between 80 and 90 of these coastal kills, but these haven't been able to be confirmed. Now, for these coastal kills, he did throw out 3 names in particular. So first off, we had a young couple. They were between the age of 20 to 24, and they were African American by the name of Eddie and Bertie Brown. He said that he had murdered them in 1972 and hid them behind a tenant house. Now, the last victim was 40-year-old Horace Jones, who he said that he had murdered in 1974. But again, these names have not been confirmed. They've not been linked back to anyone. So we don't know if he's just made this up. So yeah, at this point, there's absolutely no evidence that he actually murdered those 3 people, and there's also no evidence to say that he actually committed 80 to 90 murders. But what we do have is 15 confirmed victims, and I'm going to tell their story just now. So in November of 1970, he would commit his first series of crimes, and these were people who he knew personally and who he wanted to kill just for personal reasons. Now, the first of this was his own niece, 15-year-old Janice Kirby, and her 17-year-old friend, Patricia Ann Alsbrook. Now, he said the reason that he wanted to kill Janice and Patricia was due to the fact that they were using and dealing drugs. Both of these young girls would be brutally beaten to their death, and Pee Wee's excuse was that he was just outraged with their drug use. But apparently what had actually happened is he had tried to sexually assault both of them, and they fought back. So what is he going to do when they fight back? He's going to kill them. That was his reasoning. Now, the next confirmed victim, we're not sure if this took place in 1971 or 1972, but his next victim was Martha Ann Dix Jr. Now, Pee Wee had chosen to kill her because apparently she was drug dealing to his niece. You know, the niece that he killed because she had used drugs? The one that he seems to love so much now that he's going to kill for her? That one. However, what I will say is that seems to just be a theory, and apparently the real reason that Pee Wee wanted to kill her is apparently he was the father of her unborn child, and maybe he just couldn't face the music on that, and he felt like the best way to get rid of her and also his unborn child was to murder her. Now, other people say that the reason he killed Martha was because she had actually ran away to Texas and got married to her wife, and apparently he did not like this. Now, Martha's bones, they actually would be found in a ditch, and they wound up losing her bones at a university when they were sent away for testing. How do we lose someone's bones? Now, by 1973 in South Carolina, little Pee Wee Gaskins, right, he was viewed as a very strange little man, but also a harmless man. And people in Prospect just seen him as, a normal resident of the town. So far from the truth. Now listen, the people of South Carolina, right, they seem to think that this is just some little harmless man. But this harmless little man drives a hearse. And to make it even worse, it has a very worrying sticker on the back of it. The sticker read, "We haul anything, dead or alive." Apparently Pee Wee found this absolutely hysterical. He was like, like, I'm driving around with this sticker on, I actually do kill people. Like, again, thinking he's Charlie Big Balls, right? But like, if I knew that guy was a weirdo, I would absolutely question that little sticker. There's more behind that sticker. But listen, he would even boast about having his own little cemetery, right? And no one thought anything of it. I think because he's got himself like pinned down as this strange little weird guy that people just think he's joking, and he's literally out here like, got my own little cemetery out back, you know, got my bodies buried nice, and people are just like, oh, Pee Wee, you're so weird. And just when we think Pee Wee Gaskins can't get any worse, he absolutely does. Pee Wee was a known racist. Now, Pee Wee had befriended a woman by the name of Doreen Hope Dempsey. Now, he had befriended Doreen several years before he murdered her. And apparently he was absolutely furious when Doreen was pregnant with a second child to an African-American man. Now at this point, Doreen had been living with Pee Wee Gaskins' friends, Johnny Sellers, and his brother Carl Sellers. Carl Sellers. Now, they were all living together in North Charleston, and one day Johnny Sellers decides to bring Doreen to see Pee Wee Gaskins and discuss the potential prospect of her living with him for a little while she's pregnant. However, when Pee Wee learned who Doreen was pregnant to, which, as we know, was an African-American man, he lost it. He went on to brutally rape and torture Doreen, and after he was finished with her, he proceeded to rape Doreen's 2-year-old child. Once he was done raping both the mother and the daughter, he took them out into his backyard and he proceeded to drown both of them in a pond. Then in 1974, Pee Wee had actually shot Johnny Sellers, you know, his friend and criminal associate. He shot him dead in the back of the head. He then proceeded to stab Johnny's 22-year-old girlfriend, Jessie Ruth Judy, and he brutally stabbed her to death. Now, the reason for these murders, according to Pee Wee, was that Johnny Sellers had asked for money that Pee Wee owed him from a stolen boat. Now, this freaks Pee Wee out because he's like, oh my god, he remembers this whole boat incident, like what if he turns me into the police about this stolen boat, or alludes to the fact that I was involved in the crime. So he decides the best action to take here is to murder Johnny Sellers and his girlfriend. Now, the reason for murdering Jessie was to make sure that she wouldn't tell the police that he had, number one, murdered Johnny, and number two, that he had been involved in the boat theft. Then in 1975, 45-year-old Silas Barnwell Yates, he would have his throat slit by Pee Wee in a murder-for-hire scheme. Now, forensics, they confirmed that his throat was, of course, slit by a knife, but Pee Wee, Karate Kid over here, he says that he karate chopped Yates right to the throat, which caused his throat to like split open, and that's why it looked like it had been slit. Okay. Now, the reason for the murder for hire was that Yates' ex-girlfriend, Suzanne Kipper Owens, she was in a bit of a dispute with Yates. So both her and her husband, they decided to pay Pee Wee $1,500 to kill Yates. Now, 25-year-old Diane Bellamy Neely, she was separated from her husband Walter Neely. Now, Pee Wee, he was friends with Walter Neely, and as a favour to his friend Walter, he decides that he is going to kill Diane for him. So Pee Wee goes to Diane and he brutally stabs her to death, and then continues to shoot her boyfriend, Avery Leroy Howard. He shoots him dead as well, just because he was there. Now, another reason that Pee Wee had originally wanted Diane dead was because she threatened to call the police on Pee Wee for allowing underage teenagers to have sex in his house. And like, yeah, she absolutely was within her right, and I wish she had got the chance to do it. But you took that away. And now we're going to talk about 13-year-old Kim Gilkin, who was brutally stabbed to death by Pee Wee Gaskins. Now, the reason that Pee Wee had decided to kill 13-year-old Kim was because she had threatened to tell the police that he had moved her from North Charleston without her permission. He had just taken her away and abducted her. Now, the other main reason that he wanted to permanently silence Kim is because she wanted to tell the police that she was being sexually abused and hurt by several men, including Pee Wee. So you can only imagine the kind of abuse and torture that this 13-year-old girl is being subjected to by this evil monster. Now, it would actually be after the murder and the disappearance of 13-year-old Kim Gilkin when the authorities would first, catch a whiff that Pee Wee might be the one involved. Now, prior to the disappearance of Kim Gilkin, she had actually told people around the town that she knew Pee Wee Gaskins. He was saying that he was going to take her away on vacation, which of course actually meant that he lured her into the middle of nowhere, where he would brutally rape and torture her. But God bless this little girl who was able to tell people what this man had planned, even though it was under false pretenses, but people immediately suspected Pee Wee. I don't know why they hadn't said anything before, right? I don't know, and obviously hindsight is a great thing. Hindsight is 2020. I don't know why they didn't say something. They didn't. Now, half-brothers Dennis Bellamy, who was 27, and John Henry Knight, who was 15, they were actually the brothers of Diane Bellamy, who we had just spoken about earlier. Now, both of these young men would be killed within minutes of each other. Pee Wee Gaskins would shoot both of the brothers in the back of the head on October the 10th, 1975. Now, Pee Wee had owed Dennis Bellamy some money for stolen guns. So Pee Wee decides that he's going to take Dennis out into the middle of the woods under, again, false pretenses. He tells him that he's got the guns in the woods and that he would just, give them back to him. So they go out into the middle of the woods, and as Dennis walks further ahead, Pee Wee pulls out a gun and shoots him dead. Now, he then took John Henry Knight out to that very same area, and this was under the pretense that they were going to go and get his brother, but of course, he was also shot dead. Now, thank God, Pee Wee Gaskins, he would eventually be arrested on November the 14th, 1975. Now, what makes this absolutely hysterical is that it was one of his own criminal co-conspirators / lackeys that would be the reason for his arrest. Walter Neely, do you remember him? I'm sure you do. He had told the police that he might have had some information regarding the deaths of Dennis Bellamy and also John Henry Knight. Now, Walter Neely, he had also told the police that Pee Wee had confided in him, about people that he had killed, several people that he had killed, that had also been reported missing during the prior 5 years. And he even hinted to the police where they might be buried. So on December the 4th, 1975, Walter Neely, he leads the police to the trailer home of Pee Wee Gaskins, to the burial site of some of his victims. Now, whilst they're there, the police are able to uncover 8 bodies of victims that were killed by Pee Wee. Pee Wee Gaskins is finally arrested. Woohoo! Now, Pee Wee had claimed to the police that he had killed upward of 90 people, but obviously the police, there's no proof of this, right? So they think this wee guy's just lying to make himself look tougher. Wee man syndrome, okay? Now, Pee Wee tried to say that a lot of these murders were random hitchhikers, his coastal kills, or others were hired jobs, he's quite the hitman these days. Now, in court, the absolute audacity of this wee guy, right? But he says to the judge, there's a lot of bodies that haven't been mentioned, but you've got enough for now. Oh my God. I want to punch him squared in the face, but I probably have to crouch down even though he's my height. Now, authorities, as we were saying, they couldn't substantiate all of these claims that Pee Wee was making, so they assume this guy's just trying to brag, like we were saying. However, Pee Wee's own daughter, Shirley, she believes and is quite confident that her father could have been capable of killing upward of 90 people. That's the kind of man he was. But unfortunately, if that did happen, then a lot of those murders remain completely unsolved. On May the 24th, 1976, Pee Wee Gaskins would be charged with 8 counts of murder and be sentenced to death. Now, very briefly, in November of 1976, the Supreme Court had ruled that South Carolina's death penalty was unconstitutional. So at this point, Pee Wee thinks that he's kind of getting off scot-free with a little life in prison sentence. However, the death penalty would be reinstated in 1978, and here's why. Now, a man by the name of Rudolph Tyner, he was incarcerated in the same prison as Pee Wee Gaskins. Now, the reason for his incarceration was that he had brutally murdered an elderly couple. So an absolute POS as well, okay? Like, we don't like this guy either. But basically, the son of the elderly couple, he desperately wanted the killer of his parents murdered. So he hired Pee Wee Gaskins to, do the job for him in prison. Now, there's only one problem at this point. Because of the crimes committed and because of Rudolph's behaviour, he was actually being held in solitary confinement. So Pee Wee Gaskins had to find a way to get to him. Now, he did start off by trying to put poison in Rudolph Tyner's food, but that never worked. He was just vomiting the food back up, and therefore the poison didn't work. Now, when this didn't work, Pee Wee made a brief phone call to his accomplice, and he told them that he needed an electric cap and as much of a stick of dynamite as you can get. Now, how they got this into the prison, I'm not entirely sure, right? But somehow it happens. Now, Pee Wee, he was able to befriend Rudolph Tyner, and he tries to give him a radio as a little gift. And he's like, do you know what, Rudolph? If you take this little radio, we can actually talk from cell to cell. We can communicate at night, read bedtime stories when we can't sleep. It's going to be great. You're going to love it. When Rudolph Tyner went to use this radio, he was blown to pieces. It had been completely rigged with some form of explosive that blew him apart. Now, it would be this crime taking place in prison that would have the death penalty reinstated for Pee Wee. Now, of course, they do a quick review of Pee Wee's cell because they need to know that it was actually him, even though it's pretty obvious, but they do a review of his cell and there is plenty of evidence in there that points to him being the killer. And because it was confirmed that Pee Wee was the killer of Rudolph Tyner, he was sentenced to the electric chair. The Supreme Court comes back in and they're like, listen, we're sorry, we got it wrong, fry him. And they did. So the night before Pee Wee's execution, he tries to take matters into his own hands, right? He wants to go out on his own accord. So he tries to slit his wrists. However, a quick little 20 stitches, sew him back up and he is ready to go. And the next day, he is put in that electric chair. Pee Wee Gaskins would be executed on September the 6th, 1991, and although this is a victory for the victims that he claimed over that time, it is debated that there could still be dozens of victims just lying decomposed in the South Carolina marshes, which is honestly heartbreaking. I don't know if they've done any search into that, but my God, I hope they have, or I at least hope that they maybe do at some point, although it seems a bit late now, but you never know. And as always with these videos, let's just take a moment to think of and send prayers to the victims and also the families of the victims who were affected and who brutally lost their lives to this horrific, awful little man. I just hope and pray that the victims have been able to find peace, and I hope somewhat that the families were able to receive a bit of closure once he was sentenced. And if there is any further victims out there, I hope and pray that their bodies can be discovered and their families can also get the closure that they deserve. If I can find photos of the victims, I will of course insert them along the way of the video. But that is it for another episode of True Crime and Makeup. I really hope you found this one interesting. It honestly baffled me when I read about this man. I keep calling him little man, but I realise I'm his height too. And if you're also his height, there is nothing wrong with that. There is no issue with being smaller. I just want to like put that out there. I'm only using it as a way to, you know, badmouth him because he's awful, but I would never ever think that about a nice normal human being. But if you do enjoy my videos, make sure you are subscribed, put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload, which is every Wednesday and Sunday at 7:30 British Standard Time. It would mean the world to me if you can engage with the video in some way, you know, leave a like, leave a comment, share. That would be absolutely amazing, because with the certain words that I use, YouTube doesn't like to push out my videos because I don't censor what I say. So if you can interact and help me get pushed out in the algorithm, that would mean the world to me. Down below in the description you will find my email address, which you can send your case suggestions to, or you can leave them in the comments below if you would prefer. You will also find my Instagram and TikTok handles if you want to give me a follow on social media. And if you go further down, you will also find links to all of the products used on my face today if there's anything that you would like to pick up. But that is it for today's video. Stay safe, be a good person, don't be a bad person, look after each other, and until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye!